Hey, good morning guys. Tush coming at you. Tuesday, April the 11th at 7 o'clock in the morning. Just watching the sun come up in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. A little ahead of us as far as the seasons are concerned. You can see the nice flowering. I'm not sure if those are cherry trees over there or magnolia trees. You can just see the mountains peeking through those two buildings over there. Looks like it's going to be a nice day. Unfortunately, we got to go to work. Vancouver at night, or at least in the early morning. Just coming up to 6 a.m. I'm still 2,800 miles away from home, and we're going to start our journey back shortly. So I hope to be back in the garage by about 6 p.m. and we'll continue working on the 68 TR250. See you then. Hey, good afternoon guys. Early evening, Friday, April the 14th, just after 6:30. And we're happy to be back in the garage tonight. We did lose a few days in the week this week. We were in Vancouver, so we lost from T-minus 160 to T-minus 157. And we're at T-minus 156 tonight. Good Friday. So we better get cracking. We'll put an hour or two in tonight anyway. I'm kind of tired, but what we're going to do is we're going to start taking this rear apart. Hopefully we'll be able to get a good start on that anyway. So we're going to work on the passenger side first. We'll remove the trailing arm and all of the suspension components and the sliding axles, and then eventually we'll remove the differential and the drive shaft. So that's the plan. First we'll work on the rear of the car before we remove to the front, and then we'll remove all the front suspension, followed by the engine and transmission. That'll come out last. I need some of the weight to help me with the removal of the transmission bits. Makes it a little easier. Anyway, so that's the plan. So we'll get to work. We're going to remove that road tire obviously first, and probably jack this side of the car up a little bit, maybe move it a little bit closer towards the body. I probably should have parked the body over to the left-hand side a little bit further, but we'll shimmy this chassis back and forth as need be so we can get at what we need to get at. Alright guys, that's it. Enough talking. I'm going to get to work. So I've had quite a few guys ask me why I'm going to change the frame, and that'll sort of become apparent actually as I show you parts of this frame. We'll start with showing you the diff mounts and how cracked they are. So those are the rear diff mounts, and they're pretty much almost all the way cracked off. The other thing you can see here, and I'll just show you parts of it, you can see how bad the side members of the frame are. They're pretty crusty, lots of holes. Let me show you this side. So you can see how bad the side of the frame is. Now, you can also see the seams down there totally rotted. Down there totally rotted. You can see how far the diff has dropped down. Anyway, so that's just for starters. We'll show you a bit more when we come across some areas of the frame that look a little less than roadworthy. We'll take a few more videos, but I thought I'd just sort of start with those couple areas that I see straight away. Okay, so we're going to work on the passenger side rear suspension first. We're going to remove the brake drum, and we're going to remove the axle, which comes out basically through the back plate, and then we're going to remove the trailing arm and all of the components like the brake cable that's attached to it. There's a nut that attaches this square stud onto the trailing arm below there. It's easier to take it off and then get to the stud afterwards. I'm sure some of this stuff is going to be seized on there. I know I've got to remove a few brake lines as well, so we'll break out the tools. Well, the passenger side rear brake doesn't look too bad. Doesn't look like there's any oil or wetness around. The pads actually look pretty good. There's quite a bit of thickness left there. Even the wheel cylinders didn't look too bad. They actually look fairly new, so that might be a good thing. Even the hub actually looks pretty new or newer. It's not showing any rust anyway on the nut and washer. So anyway, we've got to get to these little. You can see in behind there. This is to remove the brake back plate and the hub. So we're going to remove those nuts. So basically, just got to spin this drum. Or the hub until we can sort of line it up with those nuts and remove those. They are threaded into the aluminum trailing arms, so it's important to be careful that you don't strip these, particularly when you're putting them back in. They have a torque of about 16 foot-pounds, and that's it. So they're not in there really solidly. A lot of the times when you go to remove these nuts, the stud will come along with them. So that's what I'm sort of expecting when we start to do this. So here we go. We're going to remove those brake shoes first, and then we'll start removing those nuts. Okay guys, we've got the emergency brake cable clevis undone, just sitting here. We've got the hard brake line off the trailing line undone. Just a quick notation, you can see that the bump stop is missing here, and that might have contributed to the big gaping hole in the bottom of the bump stop on the body tub. We've got all 6 of the nuts off of the trailing arm, or in the studs in the trailing arm, and as you mentioned, I knew that some of them were probably going to come out with the nuts on them, so there are the studs. So we're pretty much ready to pull this hub right straight out of the axle. Now you'll see it's got a little bit of a gaiter on here. That gaiter should actually pull through the opening of the brake backplate, and we should be able to just pull it straight out. So we're going to do that now, and we'll bring you back when we get her done. Here's a quick shot of the disassembled trailing arm. So we've got the different components. So here's the hub, as you can see. And for those of you who have never taken the hubs out before, not to worry, it's splined on the end, but there's actually you can only go back one way into the tube, as it's got one larger spline, so you just need to line it up appropriately and it'll go back no problem. You don't need to mark it or anything. I remember when I took mine out the first time, I was wondering how I was going to get it back together in the right orientation, but there's no worry about that. So there's the hub, there's the brake back plate with the adjuster and the brake cylinder. Obviously the drum over here and the brake shoes, and I think I got a spring over here somewhere. Just got to find where the other spring went, but oh, there it is there. So there's the brake shoes. So that's all apart. So I guess what we'll do now is we'll move on to removing the rest of the brake lines from the trailing arm, and we'll remove this stud, as I'd mentioned, from below this block fixing the emergency brake cable. And hopefully it'll come off okay. It might be rusted on there solid. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll remove the trailing arm entirely. So that's what the next task is going to be. So while we're on the rear trailing arm bolts, I thought I'd mention this. So you might notice that the orientation of these bolts, and you can see that this bolt here is facing outwards towards the passenger side, and there's no way to remove the trailing arm because there's no way you can pound the bolt out because the frame gets in the way. So that's kind of a safety, I think, from the factory that did that way. I know a lot of guys, when they do the restorations, they turn the bolt the other way so they can remove the trailing arms if need be, without actually having to remove the brackets. Anyway, since this is in this direction, we're going to remove the brackets in order to get the trailing arm off. So I'll just give you a quick shot of that. Guys, just another quick note about the rear trailing arm brackets on these cars. So if anybody has not done a restoration before on a 250 6, or I believe it'll probably be the same situation for the IRS TR4, these trailing arm brackets actually have shims behind them on the frame. So if you're going back with an original frame, or the frame that came with the car, you're going to want to keep track of the number of shims that you have behind this bracket when you put the car back together. This one looks like it may have 4 shims on the outside. It looks like it may have 1 shim on the inside. So this will get you close as far as getting your toe back to where it should be, at least well enough to get you into an alignment shop if you're putting the car back together for the first time. Make sure you put the shims back in where they came out. These trailing arm brackets are, these actually will adjust the camber of the car. I do have an adjustable camber kit from Good Parts coming, so we won't be using these brackets again. I can say, however, that to anybody that's restoring these cars, to take these brackets off and clean them very carefully, because a number of the cars I've seen actually have cracks. They have stress cracks through them, and you can't see them without cleaning them up really well. I suggest putting them in a sandblaster and blasting them clean, and then the marks, the crack marks will become apparent. They usually crack between the bolt holes, so that's another suggestion for you to do if you're ever working on the rear end of these cars. That's it. I'll stop blabbering, and we'll continue on removing these brackets. All right, you guys, just wanted to mention one more thing about this area of the car. This is sort of a critical area for you to inspect if you're thinking about buying a 250 or a TR6, or I'm sure it's probably the same case for the IRS TR4 as well. This particular area rusts out quite badly, and it's a critical area because the trailing arms attach to it. So you'll find that it rusts out quite badly in these areas down here inside the channels where the pickups for the brackets are. So you need to inspect this area very, very carefully. You probably saw on Elon's channel, Elon actually replaced this piece in here, built a nice, really nice frame jig to be able to replace this piece. This piece is available. I don't believe it's too expensive. It's probably about 70 or 80 bucks just for each side to repair this section. So it is doable. It is a little bit of work and some welding to do, but it is repairable. So I just wanted to mention that. It also has behind the frame, there's actually some structural tubing that prevents this from collapsing when the trailing arm brackets are tightened up. Alright guys, we'll come back. Alright guys, the trailing arm is off the passenger side of the car and we've just got it sitting here on the ground. So the next step for this will be to clean it up. We'll probably either bead blast it with either glass beads or crushed glass, or aluminum oxide works well on these. Then we'll have to decide whether we want to just clear coat it or whether we want to paint it, or there's lots of different options as far as trying to preserve this thing. Obviously this will get new bushings. I do have new polyurethane bushings for this, so those bushings will have to come out. I'll show you how to do that at a later date. And obviously we'll pull those trailing arm brackets off there at some point as well. But we're just going to leave it as it is right now, and we'll clean it up when we get around to it. Okay guys, now we've just moved the frame over so I can get to the driver's side. So we're going to repeat the process and remove the driver's side trailing arm rear suspension and the axle, or at least half the axle. There we go. So just looking at the driver's side shim pack, and that's a pretty big pack of shims. That's about 8 or 9 shims in there on the outside, and probably about, oh, it looks like 5 or 6 on the inside. So yeah, lots of shimming there. I can see that they replaced the, this is called the t-shirt section for kind of obvious reason. It looks like a bit of a t-shirt. This has been replaced on the top of this frame, so it's had a lot of work done in the center section of this frame at some point in its life. Anyway, we're going to remove that trailing arm now. We've got pretty much everything else undone, and we've got the hub out. So we're going to remove the bolts for that are holding the trailing arm on, and we'll remove that and get that out of the way. Alright guys, so driver's side trailing arm is off, and I think what we'll do now is we'll just go after these inner axles. And you can see they're just nicely fastened there with some big old nylocks. So we're going to remove those from both sides, and then we'll call it a night. So we'll come back with an update once those are removed, and I'll give you an update on the log. So just a quick reminder as well on these flanges and on the drive shaft to make sure to use the correct bolts. They're supposed to have a shoulder on them, and they're supposed to be a machined fit for these flanges. So you can see this is a fully threaded bolt. It is a grade 8, but it's the incorrect bolt for this application, so make sure you have the correct ones or you're going to end up wallowing out the holes on this. So just a quick note there as well. Alright, we've got the inner part of the stub axle off. We've just got it sitting over here, and we had one wrong bolt, and it looks like about 3 of the correct shouldered bolts. Anyway, we're going to move on to the other side, but I just thought I'd give you a quick shot of this. So this is the rear body mount, and there's a spacer in there. So I was just taking a look at the spacer because it doesn't look right. So I was looking at it, and I flipped it over. If you can believe it, it looks like somebody used an old grinding disc. That says maximum safe RPM on it. You know, you probably can't read that. Somebody's actually used the center out of an old grinding disc as a spacer, and it looks like they've done it on both sides. So I thought it was kind of funny. And I guess you use what you got. Alright guys, we'll move on to the other side. Alright guys, end of night update. Here's the journal entries for the night. T-156. And just a few bags of hardware and fasteners and parts for tonight. So I'm happy to make some progress on the car tonight. Didn't get a lot done, but got enough done anyway. Better than sitting on the couch. So I think for tomorrow we're going to concentrate on removing the diff and the drive shaft. That will probably entail us trying to get the exhaust off, and I think we may try to physically remove the exhaust with by unbolting the clamps first, but If that doesn't work, then the old saw is going to come out and just cut that thing off to make it easier on us. But anyway, the important thing is the diff and the drive shaft tomorrow. I've got about a half day to work on it tomorrow. I've been instructed and I'm cooking Easter dinner tomorrow by my sister. So I've got to be at my sister's for around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we'll try to get out here fairly early tomorrow morning and start working on this and then do a half a day on it before we get cleaned up and go for dinner. Look at this night owl, hey? Geez, Les is not in bed yet. It's 9:35 and all the work is done and Les shows up.
Yeah, right.
Imagine that.
Because